Oh, I'm not a vampire. That's just bloat. And away we go. Vampires have existed in our stories and in our psyche for perhaps thousands of years. Not necessarily vampires as we now know them, but vampire like creatures. Undead humanoid entities which feast on the blood or life force of the living. They have haunted our stories for as long back as we can trace. Throughout this series, I have, in fact, been trying to trace the belief in vampires through time and across cultures, while examining their significance and evolution. We can trace the history of vampires a few ways. To go as far back as possible, the best option is to look at folklore and ancient traditions. We can see parts of this folkloric timeline in episode 2, as we followed the tales of bloodthirsty entities as far back as ancient Mesopotamia. It is very easy to follow the evolution of the vampire in modern times by examining their role in literature and film since the first popular vampire novels, Carmilla and Dracula. This we did in our first installment of the series. In this third and final excursion, we're going to look at the history of belief in the undead using human history as the main body of evidence. We will also tackle the greatest question of all. Why have humans believed in vampires so strongly for so long? So the word vampire hasn't actually been around very long in relation to the belief in creatures who fit the bill. Because belief in things like this can be seen in cultures all around the world, historians and folklorists tend to use the word revenant instead of vampire. There is continued debate regarding the origin of the word, but its first verifiable appearance comes from the 1700s, likely evolved from Old Slavic words that mean the same thing. Although now we think of vampires as looking very human, aside from the pale skin and sharp teeth, and who are transformed by the bite of another vampire, the OG vamps were quite different. In folklore, monsters who fit this description are almost always dead humans before they transform. They are the repossessed corpses of people which rise from the grave at night to feed upon the living. As such, they appear in varying states of decay. And they weren't transformed by being bitten by another member of the undead army. In most cases, people believed that anyone could become a vampire after death, but people with certain personality traits or certain manners of death were most likely to be afflicted with this curse. It was believed by many cultures around Europe and Western Asia that people who drink too much, steal, murder, or are otherwise impure or sinful were likely to rise from the dead and drink people's blood. You are also at risk if you died by suicide, murder, the plague, or drowning. The drowning, I don't quite get. Let me know if you know anything about that down in the comments. It's rude. Due to the nature of vampires, being critters that crawl up from the earth after being lain to rest, it makes sense that a good place to start looking for evidence of their reign of terror would be in burial rites and burial sites. One of the greatest bodies of evidence that we have in following the history of vampire belief is in the literal bodies of people who have been buried, and then obviously dug up by archaeologists so we can talk about them. Story time. So people have not stopped believing in vampires, not totally anyway. And many cultures maintain their belief in the old school versions of these vampires. And I'm not sure if they consider them to be two separate entities altogether, or if they simply dismiss the Dracula-style vampires that we talk about mostly today. If you know, go to the comments and share with the class, because I want to know. So, there is a relatively recent story regarding a potential real-life vampire. For this community, we use the word strigoi, which I talked about in episode 2, which this story made its way into news outlets around the world in the year 2004. Geez, 20 years ago. In Romania, there was a man named Petra Toma who had passed away, like you do. Toma's niece claimed that she was being tormented by him since he died. Yes, she was certain that she had been seeing him wandering the streets at night on a regular basis since he had been buried. This woman was sure that Petra Toma was climbing out of his grave with the intention of killing her, and after the niece reached out for help, a group of 5 men traveled to her town to help her get rid of the monster. Interviews with the men and Petra Toma's family can be found online. In one, His brother explains what a terrible time they had while trying to dig up Toma from his grave. According to him, they tried to break through his body with a pickaxe because it was frozen. When they got to the body, it was frozen solid, but they noticed fresh blood around his mouth. Remember that. This obviously freaked them out because his entire body was a block of ice, but the blood was not frozen. Then they stabbed his corpse with a knife, and when they did so, it growled. Twice the body growled, which scared the absolute shit out of them, and they ran away to get help. After gathering a decent amount of backup, they returned to the grave and used teamwork to remove the heart from the body. Then they burned it, dumped the ashes into a glass of water, and then they drank that, therefore saving the world. We don't make fun. Now, while many members of Petra Toma's family were into this whole thing, obviously, including his brother and niece, Toma's sister was none too pleased. She was pretty pissed off about her father's grave and body being desecrated like this. While much of her community still held strong to these old beliefs, she did not. She's the one who shared the story with the media, and she also called the cops on the people who did it because they were guilty of desecrating his grave and abusing his corpse, which is very illegal in most places. But, you see, I include this story to illustrate the fact that many cultures believe that the best thing to do to protect ourselves from vampires is to stop them from being able to crawl out of their grave when the curse hits. If it gets out the first time, it can be a real pain in the ass to put an end to it, as you've seen. Best to nip it in the bud at the time of burial and avoid any such nonsense in the future. So, Ireland. A series of archaeological digs took place at Kiltishin, near Lough Key in Ireland between 2005 and 2009. Initially, the project was designed to search for artifacts from an old bishop's palace from the 12th century. The team was led by archaeologists Chris Reid from the Institute of Technology in Sligo, Ireland, and Thomas Finnan from the University of St. Louis. While the archaeologists were digging around, they uncovered 137 skeletons, but two such individuals were buried sometime in the 700s. That's the century which came 700 years after we started counting up again. Those two were particularly noteworthy among the many unearthed. These were the bodies of two men who had been buried in the same area, each with a large stone crammed into their mouths. Chris Reid, one of the team leaders, stated that the stone was clearly placed in the mouth deliberately. He noted that one of them had such a large stone placed in his mouth so forcefully, in fact, that his jaw was nearly dislocated. Other skeletons were found at the site that were strange, one with its legs crushed and bent backward around a large stone. It was clear to the archaeologists that this burial was done in a very violent and aggressive manner, and it's possible that they were intentionally disfiguring the body by making its legs all fucked up like that. Like, this poor corpse was completely mangled. I'll put a picture up. Beware. So these three skeletons were brought to be cleaned and analyzed in a lab. While looking at the bones, they found many cut marks, which show that many of the individuals were killed by bladed weapons. This is out of all 137 of them, And this makes sense, considering what was going on in Ireland in the 8th century. It wasn't a particularly peaceful time. The 8th century saw the full integration of Christianity into Irish society, the succession of a high king, and the beginning of Viking raids by the people from the north. But even in such a generally violent period, it was extremely abnormal for a burial to reflect the level of brutality that we see in these three disfigured skeletons that were found. So the nature of these burials is so far removed from the norm that they fall into a specific category, which is used to study history and culture: deviant burials. Burials like this are called deviant because, simply put, the manner in which they are performed deviates from the regular practices of the culture at the time. In Ireland, people were pretty much always cremated. My dog's drinking water. We love him very much. You done? You done? One moment. I'm back. So in Ireland, people were pretty much always cremated, meaning their bodies were burned on pyres after death, until the late 300s and early 400s. This switch up in burial rites was the result of Christian influence. Christianity, specifically Roman Catholicism, began to spread around into Ireland in the 300s, brought by travelers from other areas of Europe. While the pagans in the region were a bit difficult to convert, according to many sources, the first Irish bishop was officially ordained in 431. The process of mass conversion of the people took a fairly long time and was done quite slowly through scattered mission work and integration of Christian beliefs and practices with traditional Celtic systems. The Irish political leadership continued to practice pagan practices until the second half of the 500s, and the people weren't fully Christianized until the end of the 700s. Which means that at the time these three deviant burials took place, Ireland was undergoing an intense and complicated religious transformation. Even after Roman Catholicism was widely adopted here, the version which became popular had many pagan influences interwoven within its rituals and teachings. So burials were relatively new to these parts in the first place, and were typically done with the expected reverence for the dead that is upheld by Christian values. It is possible, however, that older pagan superstitions influenced burial rites on occasion, as they did other areas of life. Many historians and archaeologists believe that such burials, or burials such as these, may have been done for the purpose of keeping bodies from rising up from their graves. Because more ancient superstitions hold that a corpse can be possessed by either the perverted spirit of the one who died or by another malicious entity, and can then claw its way out of the ground to drink the blood of the living, it would make sense to take precautions. If the belief in revenants, or as we're calling them, vampires, continued within the Irish communities following the conversion to Christianity, it would follow that people may feel compelled to perform certain burial rites to defend against these monsters. This possibility is most clear in the examples of the two men who had the large stones shoved into their mouths. The stones could theoretically prevent undead from feeding upon anyone after they come out, should it be reborn to walk the earth. Or perhaps it would serve to block an evil entity from entering the body through the mouth. So these graves in Ireland date back to the 8th century, as I've said. We can find more evidence of the relationship between spiritual and cultural shifts in this region at the time, particularly in regard to vampires, by examining some penitential texts, which were written between the 7th and 9th centuries. In doing so, we can also see that the worry over vampires was likely propelled by the mingling of old superstition with the arrival of Christianity. One text which refers directly to concerns regarding the undead is titled The First Senate of St. Patrick. I'm sure we all know that name. This briefly describes what someone should do if they're worried about being hunted by a vampire or other undead creature. It's not really specific or helpful, really. It suggests seeking refuge on the grounds of a church or holy place. This is the easiest example to find from the period in which these people were buried, but there comes a flood of stories tied to the church starting after the 10th century, suggesting that belief in vampires actually grew during that time, likely influenced by the church. And I'm not the only one who thinks this, but if your goal is to get as many people as possible to start coming to church every week, one easy way is to make them scared that they'll have their blood sucked out of them if they don't. Just saying. I'm going to give you two of these stories. William of Malmesbury described a witch in the year 1060. According to the text, this witch was worried that she would be reborn a vampire after death. In order to avoid this, she left specific instructions for the townspeople. After she died, they were to sew her up in the skin of a stag and place her in a stone coffin. Then they needed to strap the coffin up with chains and locks and then bury her. Instead, according to William's account, the people put her in the ground as they normally would, but recited a prayer over her grave for 3 days, as if they didn't believe her entirely, but they may as well do a little something something just in case. Allegedly, a devil came forth on a black horse, took her body, possessed it, and now it haunts the area forever. Always listen to a witch. By the way, look what you've done. Another story of this from the same period goes as thus. Let's see. All of the noble folk of the land were really fucking sick of looking at poor people. It was disgusting. So they came up with a plan to relocate all of the peasants to a certain village a ways down the road where they could all be gross and poor together. A lord came upon 2 peasants, and he convinced them to go and join the other poors. The peasants were actually able to build a thriving community together, so the 2 peasants sent by this lord were pretty happy with the change. Unfortunately, they died shortly after they arrived, and were buried in the standard fashion of the period. The other people of the community, however, started to see the reanimated corpses of these 2 men. They would wander around every night. Most of the people straight up dipped and left the village rather than deal with that bullshit, but not everyone was able to uproot their lives like that. So those who remained got permission from the bishop to dig up the bodies and see what the fuck was going on, right? So the bodies appeared to have been largely unchanged since burial. But there was something very strange about them, if that itself wasn't weird to you. Someone had placed a white cloth over their heads, and those cloths were stained red with fresh blood. The villagers lost their shit and beheaded the bodies. Then they cut into them and tore out their hearts. The hearts were then carried to the top of a hill and burned on a pyre. It is said that 2 crows rose from the smoke as their hearts turned to ash. I find it interesting to look at the stories and texts from the time in conjunction with the archaeological evidence. It helps us develop a better understanding of exactly what we might be seeing in the physical evidence, right? What cultural things were they talking about at the time that may have had an influence on the physical stuff we're looking at, right? So, these Irish graves are by no means the only examples of possible anti-vampire burials that we've uncovered in recent decades. There have been many discovered all across Europe that are eerily similar to the ones we've looked at. For example, skeletons have been found which seem to have been weighed down with large boulders, specifically some uncovered in the Czech Republic in the 1960s. In England, bodies were found which had large iron nails which had been hammered into the body. One body had the nails in the heart, the ankle, and the shoulder, giving the impression that someone had tried to secure the body into its grave, preventing it from rising up later. Other types of deviant burials include people who have been found decapitated, with their heads to their side or between their legs, people with their limbs bound together, and even sometimes it counts as a deviant burial if a person is found facing a different direction from the rest of the people buried in the same place. Most types of deviant burials don't necessarily scream anti-vampire, but some of them, such as the ones which have been found with large iron rods pinning them down into their caskets, or with iron shackles around their wrists or necks, those might be indeed have been done to stop the undead. Much like a few individuals who have been found in Bulgaria. One of the Bulgarian skeletons was found with a 2-pound iron rod hammered straight through his chest. In another area, 2 bodies nicknamed the twin vampires of Sozopol, dated to the 14th century, were found to have iron stakes through their chests. As we know, one of the only universal ways of slaying a vampire is to shove a stake through its heart. Is it possible that this part of the tradition is the result of people staking bodies down through the heart during burial? That's what I think. Let me know in the comments if you agree. So, as I mentioned, near the beginning of this, that it was commonly believed that people who died of the plague were one of the demographics most susceptible to becoming a vampire. This is noteworthy, because the vast majority of deviant burials are found in plague pits. Technically, a plague pit is, in itself, a deviant burial, but most people who get tossed in them are treated with the same level of respect, or lack thereof, For clarity, a plague pit is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. During times of plague, that is widespread and uncontrollable sickness that takes out much of the population, people would resort to digging a large, like one large hole, and using it as a mass grave for everyone who succumbed to the illness. This helped with the excess number of burials, which would have to take place all at once, and it also sort of kept the infected bodies contained in their own area. While excavating plague pits, archaeologists find individuals with stones shoved into their mouths surprisingly often. This is often done in exactly the same way as it was for the two men found at the site in Ireland, suggesting that it was done for the same reason. In Italy, a plague pit from an epidemic in 1630 was studied, and among the many who were buried there was a woman who had a large stone in her mouth. Was this woman more likely to be a vampire than the others? Perhaps it's individuals with one or more potential vampire traits who are singled out in this way. Maybe she died of the plague and was also a thief or alcoholic. Interesting note about plague vampires. Versions of this superstition state that vampires who awaken in plague pits will eat all of the other bodies that they're buried with. Gross. Gross. So, I've got one more story for you, which will lead us to some insight uh, about what has caused the everlasting fear of the undead. According to news articles, which circulated in Europe in the year 1732, a vampiric outbreak held a Serbian village in its clutches. Members of the community claimed that several people, 17, based on some sources, had died suddenly and mysteriously. Somehow, someway, the villagers learned that the bodies were not decaying in their graves. So they dug them up, 10 of them. They dug 10 of the bodies up and executed them by various means, which I think is one way of saying they abused some corpses. The people believed that their loved ones had transformed into vampires, and they were all very much freaked out. The goal in the exhumation and violence against the bodies was to end the affliction of the vampiric curse. News of these events spread around Europe for everyone to read via a series of around 150 journal articles, which were published between the 1730s and 1760s. Some people believe that this is the event, which pulled vampires out of folklore and into modern consciousness, rekindling the age-old fear of the undead among common folk of Europe. So from this vampire infestation in Serbia came one official autopsy report, which was prepared by Habsburg Military Commission stationed in Serbia. Details found in sources regarding this incident are all over the place, so it's difficult for me to find a true and accurate description of what went down and who did what. But ultimately, these sources, articles, and rumors all generate one story that is worth sharing. The story, the conglomeration of the stories that I've put together for you, goes that after these people dug up and remurdered their kinsfolk, then word spread. A military surgeon, who had no patience for superstitious nonsense, decided to go and examine the bodies of the supposed vampires. He intended to prove once and for all that all these people were no undead monsters. Throughout his examinations, he noticed something extremely odd, though. All of the corpses were presenting different stages of decay. Only 4 of the 17 seemed to be decomposing at the expected rate, consistent with his knowledge, anyway. Among the bodies, he found a quantity of extra fresh blood that had not been coagulated, which was very strange to the surgeon. Some bodies looked weirdly fresh and moist. Some had rosy cheeks, as if they weren't dead at all. He was stumped and thought to himself, shit, maybe they are vampires. Maybe I'm the asshole here, coming in with my science. It is said that this investigation is what propelled modern science to a greater level of wisdom regarding what happens to our bodies after death. Today, we know that the way that these bodies were decomposing wasn't actually weird at all. Not that weird, anyway. because depending on internal factors within the body and external factors from the environment, the rate at which a human body decays can vary wildly. For example, some bodies may seem plump and healthy because of gases, the phase of decomposition that we now call bloat, and the unexplained, uncoagulated fluids are due to another stage of decomp called active decay, which is when the internal fluids begin to leak from orifices of the body. This stage of decay, which is when the internal fluids are leaking out, it really explains the many examples of posthumous bodies which have been found with blood around their mouths. If you remember the story about the peasants that I told you earlier with their facial cloths that were stained with blood, that's probably an example of active decay. Sorry, I don't know what my mouth did there. I combined sentences in a weird way. I hope that made sense. You get what you get. It's been a long day. My ass hurts. Let's see. So, today, with all of that in mind, scholars have generally agreed on one conclusion that explains the persistent belief in vampires. Why we think they're real at all, right? Decomposition, and the many ways that the process of such can vary. It's only been relatively recently that we've understood the varying ways and speeds at which a human body can decompose, or the many factors that can influence the rate at which a corpse goes through these different stages. Environmental factors and combinations of circumstances can change the details and timeframes of each step of the process. There are many different reasons why people may have been digging up corpses before. Honestly, there are cultures that have rituals that include pulling someone back up and doing something with or for them later. The most common reason, however, is in the case of plague pits. A group of people would die and be buried, and then another group of people would die, and because they needed to be buried with the others, often the dirt on top would be dug up again so that the second batch of plague victims could be added to the pile below. This would be giving the people a front row seat to the many stages of human decay all at once. And I imagine it was extremely disturbing. So, frequently observed variables in the process of decomposition include temperature, moisture, insect activity, levels of light exposure, the material used to cover the bodies, types of caskets, the cause of death, pH and oxygen levels, the position of the body, etc. Essentially, no two bodies are always going to decompose the same way or at the same speed. To be clear, decomposition is the natural process of biological tissues breaking down after death. We know how no body decomposes in exactly the same way now, but there are four main stages of decomposition of the human body. When a corpse gets to each stage, isn't set in stone, and the length of time it takes to move through is different, but the phases are the same. The four stages are autolysis, bloat, active decay, and skeletonization. Autolysis, probably one of the most often seen back then, begins immediately after death. Self-digestion. As soon as respiration and blood circulation stop, the body can no longer get oxygen or expel waste. This means that excess carbon dioxide causes a rise in acidity, rupturing the membranes of cells within the body. The enzymes, then released from the membranes through these tears, begin to eat the cells. This is when rigor mortis occurs, which is muscle stiffening. Small blisters filled with nutrient-rich fluid begin to appear on internal organs on the surface of the skin, making the body look glossy or shiny, like they've got a layer of sweat, or they're sparkling like the vampires in Twilight. That's the sparkle skin. That's pus. Another stage many corpses were probably found in was bloat. During this stage, the enzymes leaked in the first stage produce a bunch of gases, and then they release a strong odor in a process called putrefaction. They're basically farting as they eat themselves alive. The cells are. The gas builds up in the body and the corpse can double in size, like a meat balloon. It's gross. The bacteria release compounds that contain sulfur and can cause discoloration of the skin, and that's when insects are summoned to the body. They like that. They like that smell. God, flies are gross. Third stage, active decay. Fluids are released through the holes in the body. The mouth and the mouth and the booty and the ears, organs, muscles, and skin start to liquefy. Soft tissue decays, leaving mostly bones, the hard stuff, and hair. The body loses most of its mass during this stage. The skeletonization, for which there's no um, real set time frame, that's when the last bits of meat disappear and leave behind just the bones. People unearthing bodies at different phases of decomposition, seeing weird stuff going on, and not realizing that it's normal, is the most likely explanation for people believing that these corpses were not all the way dead. For example, the bloat stage makes bodies look puffy and kind of healthy from a certain angle, right? Like they're well fed. The skin sometimes looks rosy and alive at this stage too. As the skin pulls back during active decay, it can make it look like teeth and fingernails have grown longer, like fangs and claws. When the fluids are being expelled from the body, it looks like fresh blood is on the lips, just like they drank some blood and went back to bed. While humans have typically always held a particular level of respect for the dead, whether that be driven by love or by fear, sometimes we treat the dead like they're fucking monsters. Deviant burials serve as a morbid lens through which we can view the past. Although many such burials may simply be performed as an act of disrespect toward the individual, there are countless examples which, by all appearances and based on popular superstitions at the time, were done for the purpose of stopping the corpses from being reanimated and seeking the blood of the innocent. Burying the dead hasn't been a particularly common practice among pre-Christian societies, at least not around Europe. I do apologize for my lack of knowledge about other regions of the world. But typically burning bodies was considered the most efficient, clean, and respectful way to dispose of dead for most cultures. This means we haven't got a whole lot of IRL evidence that allows us to trace belief in the undead before the spread of Christianity. No bodies buried means no bodies dug up and found to have been buried weirdly. And that is why if we want to look further back, we have to rely mostly on folklore. If you're interested in that, I dig into the other two sessions. Dig into it in the other two sessions of the series. There is actually a whole lot more that one could talk about regarding vampires. I took some suggestions for this, and I did my best to include as much as possible. But I'm sick of the little fuckers for now, and so this is the final episode of the Halloween special vampire series. I hope it was worth it. Go check out my other videos if you like this sort of thing. I've got a pretty big catalog of monster episodes at this point, and while some are long like this, most are much shorter and less fact-heavy. Subscribe to the channel if you want more of my bullshit. If you click the button down there, it would really help me a lot. Comment down below if you think I'm a fucking idiot, or if you know anything cool about vampires that I haven't mentioned. And tell me your favorite Halloween activity. Maybe your favorite vampire movie. What's your favorite vampire movie? I think mine is 30 Days of Night. And Suck. Not a lot of people have heard of Suck. So vampires in 30 Days of Night are like really different from the ones that I've talked about today. That's a whole different type of vampire. That would require its own episode. I'm not doing that. You guys want me to do that? I don't want to do that. Maybe I'll do that. Next year. Shit. Anyway, whole nother thing. I've got a Patreon. If you would like to join it and support me, you can get personal updates, and I do polls, and I start conversations, and I ask a lot of questions, and not a lot of people answer. So if you wanted to answer, so when I ask questions, people answer, that would be really cool. And thank you to my patrons, by the way, who are Michael Matei, Patrick Finnegan, Christopher Coulson, Smoothie, Andre Davos, Walter Fate, Partial, Dale, McBabylegs, Ryan Pender, and Gregory Dent. And then, of course, also thank you to my free patrons who are there supporting me just because they care. So, I guess later, nerd, and happy Halloween. I hope this comes out on Halloween. If not, like spooky season for me and over here on this channel Lasts all the way until spring. Winter is the scary time, in my opinion. Everything's dead. All right. Farewell.